Okay. So the name of the location that you want to talk about.
So I'd like to talk about the area east of the UCSD campus that's now known as the Golden Triangle.
Okay. Um, so need latitude and longitude. I can find that later. So the Golden Triangle. So to
In
break.
La Jolla, California.
Okay. Um, so how did this place look before? So you went to college at UCSD or grad school, right? So
I did.
how did this place look before?
I went to graduate school at UCSD, and I lived in what was called the Mesa Apartments. And at that time, that was where development ended. The only other thing out there was a shopping center called University Town Center, and that
Mm-hmm.
was probably, maybe like a half a mile away. And the rest of the area out there was all untouched native coastal sage scrub habitat. It was all open space
Mm-hmm.
filled with native species at that time. And that was between 1982 and 1989.
Okay, and how has it changed? If you want to talk about the kind of progression over time as you've lived in San Diego since then, or kind of like a stark contrast then and now, however you want to talk about that.
So, it was pretty interesting back then. I had a friend who was a graduate student. She was actually doing her research out there. She was
Okay.
studying the
Mm-hmm.
native California mouse, and we would go out and we were trapping for mice out there. So we spent a lot of time out in that habitat, and I know that there were firsthand that there were a lot of native species living out there. And she was studying, the genetic differences that were occurring because those populations were cut off from the populations that were on the coast by a lot of the development that was happening. So the
Mm.
development was progressing over time. Actually, during the time that she was working out there, some of the development, the plans were in place, and some of the development was beginning to go in. And by the end of the time in my graduate school, those open space areas were getting smaller. But if you
Mm-hmm.
were to go out there today, you would basically see not one bit of native habitat.
Really?
It is completely filled in by mostly shopping, retail,
Mm-hmm.
banking, multi-use, some medical offices, some housing. Every inch of space between the campus and University City Town Center, the mall, and
Mm-hmm.
beyond there now, and the mall is actually expanding, is
Yeah.
now completely developed, and there isn't any native open space left in that area at all anymore.
And there hasn't been any effort to kind of maintain that or maintain biodiversity, or are there places nearby that where those native species still exist, or is it all completely
So that
gone?
particular area is all completely developed.
Right.
There was an effort in San Diego County called the Multi-Species Conservation Plan, or the
Okay.
MSCP,
Mm-hmm.
where it was decided as a region that we wanted to maintain some open space. So there were some areas that were designated as open space. Basically, those were set aside, and in return, other areas were allowed to be developed. So there is still open space in San Diego County within the MSCP, but because the MSCP was set aside, it kind of basically paved the way, so to speak, for other areas of open space to go ahead and be developed. And it's been a little bit controversial. A lot of people felt like the MSCP was a good idea, but
Mm-hmm.
nobody really knew if enough space was set aside, and if the spaces that were set aside were connected enough to preserve, to allow the different species to be able to persist.
Right. Right.
And a lot of money was put into buying the habitat to set aside the preserve,
Mm-hmm.
but not a lot of money was set aside to manage the preserve over time. So there hasn't really been a lot of follow-up to see how well the preserve system's working, and that's been one of the criticisms of the MSCP.
Okay. Okay, so I know you mentioned that you used to go do field work with one of your friends. What are some of the other things that you used to do in this area?
Well, it was just a nice place to take a walk because it
Right.
was it
Mm-hmm.
was adjacent to where we lived, and it was flat, which also made it really attractive to developers. That's one of the other things that happened in San Diego County, is that a lot of the flat areas got developed and a lot of the canyon areas didn't,
Okay.
because they weren't so good for development, right?
Right.
They were, the hilly areas are the ones that you see that are still undeveloped, and you see a lot of development on the flat mesa tops. But it was just a great place to just go walk, basically, and relax and get out into nature, de-stress a little bit from school,
Right.
I guess.
Yeah. Very understandable.
Yeah.
Have you been back there recently, or what are some of the things that you do there now? If you go back
Well,
frequently.
I mean, you've actually been there when we would drive over to La Jolla Country Day for
Right.
you to go to your baseball practice. We were actually driving right through that area.
Okay,
That
and
main street that we would drive down, Genesee there on both sides of the street, that area, the Eastgate Mall area, that is the area that used to be open space.
So yeah, so wow, now I'm thinking back about it, it's completely developed. There's nothing
Right.
there except for buildings, shopping malls, food places, all that.
Yes,
Wow.
exactly. So it's changed. It's changed a lot in what I would consider to be a relatively, in the grand scheme of things, a relatively short amount of time.
Right. I don't know. How do you, if there's anything, if you want to have any concluding thoughts, or want to kind of sum up how you feel about the change, or what you think should be done or could be done to go back to that original kind of native habitat, if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, just that I think that the native habitat in San Diego County, people tend to overlook it a little bit because it doesn't have the big flashy species. But
Right.
we have a lot of really interesting and important native species, and if there were anything that I think would be good, would be if there was more public awareness about those species and appreciation for them, and if people who do live on the edges of canyons where those species still exist,
Right.
knew a little bit more about them, did things like simple things like keeping their cats indoors, putting out bird feeders, planting native plants in their yards, butterfly friendly plants. There's a lot of things that people can do that can help native species that I think they're just not aware of. So, that is something that, through my work at the San Diego Zoo, we do try to promote.
Right.
But, it's difficult because, right, everybody wants to live in San Diego. It's a great place to live. You know that. You grew up here. I mean, we live here. And so development, is occurring.
It's inevitable sometimes.
It's inevitable, I think. I just hope it can be done in the best possible way so that it can accommodate, some of these species continuing to exist. And I hope that, I have a lot of hope that the multiple species conservation program, that those lands can be managed into the future and continue to preserve those species. It makes me sad when I go to that particular location because, of course, I remember how it was.
Right.
But I also appreciate the fact that there is still a lot of nice open space in San Diego County that is preserved that the public can access. And, I think that's part of what makes it still a great place to live.
Right. Okay, well, thank you for your time. It was nice talking to you.
All right. You're welcome. Good luck with your project.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.